Okay, today we're going to be looking at lesson 5 of chapter 11, which is fractions and volume. Our learning objective is you will use a net to analyze the relationship between the volume and the edge lengths of a rectangular prism with fractional edge lengths. Our central question is, what is the relationship between the volume and the edge lengths of a prism with fractional edge lengths? Volume is the measure of number of unit cubes needed to occupy a given space without gaps or overlaps. You can find the volume of a rectangular prism by saying how many unit cubes it takes to fill the prism. So basically what it's saying is volume is how many cubes will fit inside of that shape that we're talking about with no spaces left and there's no overlapping cubes. Recall that a unit cube is a cube with a side length of 1 and has a volume of 1 cubic unit. So we've used unit cubes a lot when we don't have a given measurement for the side length. We just use it in units. A jewelry box has a length of 3 1/2 units, a width of 1 1/2 units, and a height of 2 units. What is the volume of the box in cubic units? So if each of the cubes in this activity has a side length of 1/2 unit, how many cubes with a side length of 1/2 does it take to form a unit cube? So if you look down here at this picture, it shows you that this is going to be 1 unit. But then this is 1/2 because that's one of those cubes that we were talking about. So how many of those would fit inside of that unit, that 1 unit cube? So if we have these little 1/2-inch unit cubes, there's going to be 1, and then we put another one there, another one here, and then we've got to fill in that back half. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so if we have 4 in the front and 4 in the back, then that would make a total of 8. So it takes 8 cubes with 1/2 side lengths to form a unit cube. So again, look at that picture right here. And it kind of shows you how those would fit. So each smaller cube represents 1/8 of a unit cube. Then I want you to cut out the net, fold and tape the net into a rectangular prism. Leave one face open so you can fill the prism with cubes. Then you're supposed to fill the prisms with cubes. So how many cubes with the side length 1/2 does it take to fill the prism? Okay, so to figure out how many cubes with the side length of 1/2 it takes to fill the prism, we're going to have to convert those numbers that we had into the 1/2-inch or the 1/2 unit side lengths. So if I label this box, let's see, it had a length of 3 1/2. It had a width of 1 1/2 and a height of 2. Now we're going to have to turn those whole numbers into 1/2 units. So to do that, we're just going to, let's see, 1 1/2 equals 1 is 2 1/2 pieces, plus we have the other 1/2, which is 3. 3 1/2, we take 3 times 2 because there's 2 1/2s in each hole. So 3 times 2 is 6. Add the other 1/2, which is 7. And 2 and 2 1/2s is 4 halves. Okay, so then we're just going to multiply those together. So we have 3 times 7, which we know is 21, and we're going to take that times 4 because length times width times height is our volume. So 21 times 4 is 84. So it takes 84 cubes with side lengths of 1/2 to fill the prism. So to find the volume of the jewelry box in cubic units, determine how many cubic units you would make from the smaller cubes to fill the prism. So if we think it takes 8 smaller cubes to make 1 unit cube. So remember we talked about that. We have 8 of these little ones to make the whole unit cube. So divide the total number of small cubes by 8. Okay, so we're going to take those 84 cubes that we had and we're going to divide that by 8 because that's how many of those 1/2 inch or those 1/2 unit cubes that it took to make 1. So we're going to take that 84 divided by 8, which gives us 10, which 84 divided by 8 is 80. So then we had 4 left. So we're going to write that remainder as a fraction. So we have 4/8 left. And then we can simplify that. So 10 and 4/8 is 10 and 1/2, because 4 is half of 8. So 10 and a half. So the volume of the jewelry box is 10 and a half cubic units. Okay, so we're going to look at making the make connections on page 624. And so you can use formulas for the volume of a rectangular prism to find the volume of the jewelry box. So if when I just explained to you, you're like, holy cow, Mrs. Nicely, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe this method will make more sense to you. Okay, so looking at the formula of a volume, or the formula for volume, is volume equals length times width times height. So we replace the variables using the values that we know. So we know the volume is 3 1/2 times, let me get back to the problem. So 3 1/2 times the width, which is 1 1/2, times the height, which was 2. Okay, so all I did was just like we did with area, we just wrote the formula and then we plugged in the numbers that we knew. So then step 3 says write the mixed numbers as fractions greater than 1. Okay, so we're going to write those mixed numbers as improper fractions. So if we take 2 times 3, which is 6 plus 1, we have 7 halves now. Times, they already did the next one for us, which was 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. 3 halves times 2. So I just wrote that same formula and wrote it as improper fractions. Then we're going to multiply across. So 7 times 3 is 21, times 2, because that's 2 over 1. So 7 times 3 is 21, times 2 is 42. 2 times 2 is 4, times 1 is still 4. So we have 42 fourths. Now we're just going to write that as a mixed number. 4 goes into 42. Let's see, I know that 4 goes into 40 10 times. And that leaves me 2 out of the 4 left. So 10 and 2 fourths, which is the same thing as 10 and 1/2, because 2 is 1/2 of 4. So the volume of the jewelry box is 10 and 1/2 cubic units. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go through number 1 on share and show, and then you will do the rest when you're out. So a prism is filled with 38 cubes with a side length of 1/2 unit. What is the volume of the prism in cubic units? So it already tells us how many cubes it's filled with. Okay, so we have that 38 cubes, and we're going to divide those into 8, because we know that there's 8 of those half unit cubes in 1 unit cube. So 38 divided by 8, which is going to be, let me think, I know 8 times 4 is 32. Okay, so then I have 4, and if I 38 minus 32 still gives me 6 left over out of the 8. So I have 4 and 6/8, which simplifies into 4, and if I divide 6 by 2, I get 3, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I have 4 3/4. So the volume equals 4 3/4 unit cubes. And the last one we're going to look at is number 3. We'll go through one of those formats together. So find the volume of the rectangular prism. So I'm going to write my formula. Volume equals length times width times height. And I'm going to plug in what I know. Volume equals 5 1/2 times 2 times 3. I'm going to write those as improper fractions. Volume equals 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11. So I have 11 halves times 2 over 1 times 3 over 1. And then I'm going to multiply across. So volume equals 11 times 2 is 22 times 3 is 66 over 2 times 1 is 2 times 1 is 2. So 66 over 2. Simplify that down. Volume equals 33 cubic units. And that would be your answer.